Ooh, that's close. Hi, everybody. Just getting everything up and running for the next presentation, my presentation, Occult Transmissions on the Poison Path. And screen share. Just giving it some time for the presentation to load. And thank you everyone for watching. This is a recorded presentation, so I appreciate everyone watching in the future. Just gonna take a moment and take a few deep breaths and settle into this. I'm really excited to do this presentation. I've been thinking about it all day, the past couple of days, throughout the first weekend of the conference. And it's just a lot of information being downloaded and transmitted and wanting to all come out at the same time. So I'm burning some frankincense to raise the vibration, also to help calm me down. Also invited my plant spirit allies in to offer support and ensure that everything comes through the way that it is needed, the way that it is intended or necessary. Especially Atropa belladonna. I have a couple berries here at the computer with me, just to connect with the physical body of the plant spirit ally. Belladonna has been a sort of constant figure throughout this entire journey and is manifested in a number of different forms that we see running through the witch archetype, the witch mythos, and lots more beside that too, which we'll get into a little bit later. But it's been a really important plant ally for me. And just preparing for this presentation, kind of thinking about it, I think it might be one of my longest relationships that is not a family member. So there's something to be said for that as well. I've been working on the poison path for, I'd say about 10 years now, in depth. It was something that I was interested in for a few years, but didn't make it my kind of core of my practice. Sort of tried to resist it even for a little while, not wanting to make it all about that because I had a lot of other interests too, in occultism and my own personal magical practice that I was pursuing. And still do, but the poison path and the poisonous plants have definitely taken a larger role, and in many ways have affected a lot of the other maybe non-related practices that I have. So basically the poison path is very different for everyone. It can mean a lot of different things, and you can approach it from a lot of different angles. There's the poison is medicine angle, so maybe more from a holistic medicinal herbalist approach. Maybe you are looking to supplement your witchcraft practice, or feel the need to get in touch with some of these more traditional or more typical plants associated with the witch mythos, the current of the witch archetype kind of running through human culture and storytelling and myth and folklore. Many of these plants can be worked with to connect to that as well. It doesn't have to be sort of shrouded in the mantle of the witch. These plants don't necessarily belong to any particular tradition or part of the world. And especially, as we'll see with the nightshades, which are ubiquitous the world over, while their uses and associations vary slightly, they are important medicinal and ceremonial plants around the world. So this presentation is what I would say maybe the clearest sort of manifestation of my current work on the poison path and what it's all been about and kind of where it's led me. It started out with an interest in traditional witchcraft, or European witchcraft, if we want to call it that, or the idea of witchcraft that has been affected by Western culture or Abrahamic religion, superstition, things like that. So the witchcraft that kind of goes back to the the Garden of Eden sort of witchcraft. You'll see the serpent as kind of a theme running throughout the entire presentation. You'll also notice sort of an interplay between dark and light, and the colors black and white. And this has been sort of an important theme for my own personal journey with these plants. They do have a lot of these attributions that many people would consider dark. But those are all very human attributions, and it's not to apply any kind of tone of morality or good and evil or light and dark, but simply as kind of descriptors to describe the type of energy or the type of gnosis or transmission or current that we're kind of tapping into and working with. So they do not have to be dark. Poisonous plants and the poison path doesn't have to be about death and poisoning. But it is definitely a part of the idea of poison and the history of poison. And in a lot of ways, it acts as a mirror for us. So there is a reason that we notice those qualities and are either attracted to them or repelled by them or fascinated by them. And regardless of how we describe them, there's definitely a marked difference there. And it's in exploring those differences and the influence that it has on us, the responses that it brings up in us, how we resonate with those different perceptions, that can really tell us a lot about ourselves. It can tell us a lot about the spirits that we're working with, or these spiritual currents that are transmitting through us. These different influences, these different things that we gravitate to that we don't know why. Those are all various different, spiritual calls or spiritual influences moving us into a specific direction for a specific reason. And it's up to us to kind of choose to go in that direction. Life is like a tree. It's got many branches, many roots, and many paths, and we can choose which one we want to go down. But it's in the choosing and the reason for the choosing that we can really learn a lot about ourselves. So through this entire journey and kind of being exposed to all of these different ideas about poisonous plants and plant medicine, the psychedelics, hallucinogens, magical practice, different people's perspectives on poison in general, or just their initial response, whether they're an herbalist, a magical practitioner, or an attendee at an expo that doesn't really have any context for any of this. It elicits all of these different responses, and it's really, really very interesting. So there's definitely, it's a big marker. There's just something there, and the fact that it keeps popping up. It's something that has continuously popped up for me. While I don't exclusively read books about poisonous plants, my studies do branch out into a lot of different other areas, and I do have a lot of background in a lot of other areas. And in retrospect and in moving forward, there have been numerous times where poison has popped up in different ways and created a lot of these just really interesting parallels, really interesting connections, and really interesting kind of points of contention. And for me, a lot of the work of the Poison Path has been kind of trying to navigate and understand those different movements, kind of following this zigzag snaking pattern throughout culture and throughout history that is sort of this poison mythos, this poison current or poison gnosis that is really kind of winding and weaving its way through everything. And I compare that to serpent wisdom or Ophidian gnosis, which we'll see throughout the slideshow that is a very, very much a recurring theme. So I've got all of these different plants. The plants are obviously a big part of it. The plants are kind of the messengers, the intermediaries, and the transmitters for a lot of this information that I'm about to gift to all of you. They are the driving force behind it, but it goes much more beyond plant magic and magical herbalism and plant medicine and things like that for me. As a witch, an occult practitioner, a folk magician, whatever you want to call me, a lot of my work is kind of working with and understanding this current of poison. And in doing that, I've looked at how it has been understood and how it has changed in different cultures around the world, and then also how it has been perceived when looking from an outside view, or how the term has been used to almost kind of create these imaginary boundaries between people and plants, and what we should and should not do, and whose plants are good and whose plants are bad, and all of that. And so that's kind of this idea of reverse engineering, of poison being medicine, of needing to kind of go back into these difficult plant relationships and come to a new understanding, so that we can get back to a more centered view and approach of working with them. And in order to do that, there's a lot of darkness, a lot of shadow, a lot of what we would term maybe low vibration things or attachments or processes that that need to be worked through. And that is part of why I'm here. So I talk about a lot of different cultures, a lot of different points in history, and they're all kind of blended together in my attempt to sort of paint this picture of this theme running throughout. So I am speaking of them, with the utmost reverence and respect, and purely as a means of demonstrating different parallels. So by no means am I trying to say that the poison path is this, or the poison path is that, or that can't be the poison path. That is the most kind of antithetical thing to what I feel like the poison path embodies, which is a very individualistic, almost Luciferian kind of approach to working with these plant allies. Going out and getting the knowledge, getting the information, getting the medicine, going out and claiming it and taking it for yourself. So definitely not trying to create any kind of additional imaginary boundaries or boxes for anything. If anything, I'm trying to break down some of those constructs. And the plants that I work with seem to be very willing to want to do that. So my name is Coby Michael. I run the poisonersapothecary.com. Also, Alexa off. My concept of time is completely out the window at this point. That was a very short presentation, if that was the case. But I run the Poisoner's Apothecary, which is currently an online store, but also an educational resource. I am also on Patreon, where you will find all of my informational, educational content, which is the kind of main crux of why I'm here and what I'm doing. I am the author of The Poison Path Herbal. I'm currently working on its sequel, which the working title is The Poison Path Grimoire. That will be coming out sometime in the future with Inner Traditions, probably in the next year or so. So I'm just kind of beginning the editing process of that. But this presentation is going to be just a little bit of what is in the second book, which is sort of a more distilled and fully realized version of the first book, but completely different because it's much more about incorporating poison plant allies and poison magic into spellcraft, ritual, plant medicine ceremony, all of the practical how-to stuff. So the first book being more about, what is the poison path? What are poisonous plants? How can we work with them? How can we formulate with them? Why are they important, etc. This one goes much deeper into sort of the occult implications of working with these plant allies. They definitely evoke a lot of different responses, which kind of having a new respect and understanding for, I guess, why people have kept their knowledge of these plants secret, because it almost does paint a target on your back in a lot of different ways. But if it wasn't for that, it would have been for something else. And I think that kind of experience is a lot of what brought me here in the first place. It's no secret that, or no secret to me anyway, that my desire to practice witchcraft stemmed from a desire to take back all of the power that was taken from me and to hurt the people that hurt me the most, through my own personal elevation and empowerment. Little did I know how much healing and processing of a lot of other people's bullshit and my own bullshit would be required to make that happen. But it was very, very much coming from a place of survival and this need to take back power and control. And we'll get into a little bit of that later on in the presentation. But my interest and affinity with the natural world and what I would call natural magic, and working with herbs and working with nature and plants and crystals and elemental magic and things like that, has always been a part of me. As far back as I can remember, before I even had words to describe or to even understand what I was doing and what was happening, that was part of who I am and who I came into this world as. And that was, in kind of early childhood, from a lot of different directions and for a lot of different reasons, just through things that we experience living in the world that we do, that sort of, I guess, became fragmented, and something else kind of started to develop alongside of that. And that's what I would maybe term like my darker side. So all of my life has very much been about dark and light, embodying both, exploring both, understanding both, because so much of my I think my early childhood and my upbringing was influenced by dark and light and good and evil, and growing up in a religious family, but also having these very dark and negative sort of spirit experiences that were shared by other people in my family. We have like this very, very sort of dualistic narrative that develops like almost right away. So in a lot of ways, this has sort of been an exploration of those manifestations of darkness and light. And that's something that's very much embodied by the plants of the poison path, and all plants really, because all plants need both. Unless they have some other magical way of photosynthesizing. Generally, they prefer a certain amount of light and a certain amount of darkness. And if they get too much or too little of either, they do not thrive. So I just started off with a little quote from an article that I wrote called Philosophia Toxicum, Toxic Philosophy. Practitioners of the poison path seek out those plants that have been ostracized or forgotten by most people. The poison path is the way of the occultist and the witch, and while there are powerful physical forces at play, including a plant's toxic and visionary effects, the focus for the poison path is on the esoteric applications for these potent forces. In short, it is the study and application of poisonous, baneful, invasive, and demonized plants for their occult virtues and to connect with them as familiar spirits. This is to develop a deeper understanding of the toxicon, venenum, and pharmacon, and its transmutational power. It is a kind of plant alchemy that demonstrates these master plant spirits work on many levels at once, in a synergy that allows for their spiritual and magical effects. So yes, many of them are entheogenic. Many of them have psychoactive or mind-altering effects. And that is a large part of their history, their mythos, and the reason that they are who they are. However, this is not a presentation on that. It's always been important for me to distinguish between the entheogenic ritual use of plant allies, plant medicine, poisonous plants, psychedelic herbs, fungi, whatever terms we want to use for these mind-altering herbs. But to also hold space for the toxin, the venom, the poison. And while that can be an analogy for the kind of enlightenment that can come with entheogenic ritual use, there is more to be explored and unpacked when we look at this quality of poison simply as poison, not as a symbol for consciousness altering or intoxication. That is very much, an important but separate part of the study and practice. So next slide. Lots of images here. Starting our journey through light and darkness. So these are just kind of explaining and pointing out some of the serpent imagery, the serpent being a very, very important and key spirit for the poison path, for witches, even in other ceremonial plant medicine traditions, we see the importance of the serpent, as we saw in P.D. Newman's presentation. The serpent just pops up in, I think, literally every culture on the planet. It represents healing, wisdom, rebirth, transformation, potency, all of those things. So it's one of our most, I would say, primal and important and universally recognizable symbols as well. So it's very much wired into the earliest parts of our brain, the most instinctual parts of our brain, to fear the image of a snake. And that primal kind of origin is probably where a lot of this comes from. Snakes are feared, they are unwanted in many cases. They've been used by various religions and what have you, to represent, the forces of evil or the forces of chaos, or these primal and dangerous sort of chthonic forces that are beyond and out of our control. So very, very much a powerful symbol, but also a symbol that strikes fear. And in a lot of those cases, I think a lot of us, myself included, can relate to a time when we were innocent, that something about us that was different struck fear in someone else, and that caused them to behave towards us in a certain way that left us changed. So we can connect with these animals, with these plants, with these fungi, with these images. We can connect to them regardless of whether they are physically present with us or not. It's just a matter of tapping into their energy, their story, their characteristics. And it's a little bit easier for us to do that with animals than it is with plants. But, I've never, let me think. I've never encountered like a dire wolf or any form of a lupus, wolf species in person, out in the wild or otherwise. But it is a spirit that I can connect to. I can conceptualize what is wolf. What does that mean to me? What does it represent? What feelings, emotions, energies does it bring up in me? I can connect to that, and I can use that connection to embody those energies and bring those energies into my life. The same can be done with plants. It's just a little bit more tricky because I guess we don't have a lot of the visual cues that we get from the animal world, maybe. But this is very much serpent wisdom. And we see this manifest in a lot of different ways. So this will go back to the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden and the serpent that convinced Eve to take a bite of the apple that left her forever changed, eventually leading into their exile from the garden. So this serpent wisdom is a transmission of occult knowledge, of spirit information. It is Promethean in nature, Promethean or Luciferian, relating to the mythos of the god Prometheus, who was punished for stealing fire from Olympus because he felt bad for humans in their cold and naked state. We also see it in the story of Loki, who is another Promethean figure who is being punished by a serpent, dripping venom over him. So serpents are symbols of transgression. They are symbols of the transmission of knowledge, and that knowledge being guarded and taken. So it is a sort of flash of divine inspiration. We see the image on the top left is a model of the meridians, very simplified model of the main energy meridians. We see this in a lot of Eastern practices, originating in Sanskrit. So typically we see this in yoga, and speaking of the chakras and energy centers and things like that. But there are these two energy channels that run up and down a central channel. That central channel would be the sort of microcosmic counterpart to the axis mundi, the world tree, or the celestial pole that holds up the universe, the everything. We have one of those running through ourselves as well. That acts as our central axis, and then we have these two opposing and complementary forces weaving and winding their way up to the top. One of them is represented as being dark, and the other is represented as being light. This is also sort of a very simple explanation or idea for the Kundalini energy, that sort of tantric sexual energy that sits at the base of the spine, that's activated through meditation and yogic practice. That is very much, or it's not very much, that is represented by a serpent, a snake that's coiled at the base of the spine, that can be charmed into rising up and opening the chakras and expanding consciousness. So that's kind of our first little snake image there. And the snake being coiled at the base of the spine is an interesting parallel to what we often see as the snake that is coiled around the base of the world tree in a number of other mythologies. The two meridians, the dark and the light, represents the solar and lunar energy, the masculine and feminine running through the human body, but also the universe and nature and all of that. So very much these two kind of opposing forces, which we see represented by the two snakes next to it. So the one on the left, which is more outline, that's the white snake. It is pointed up. And then to the right, we have the black snake, which is pointed down. So snakes get the rap for being, dark and spooky and responsible for the fall of mankind and whatnot, but they are very much embodiments of both solar and lunar. So we have the two different paths. We have the celestial path of climbing the world tree, of ascending into these more celestial places, angelic spirits, galactic consciousness, interdimensional entities, and things like that. And then we have this alternative path, which descends and goes down into the roots of the world tree. It goes into the chthonic realm. So these are things that bring us within, things that bring us deeper, to connect with land spirits, familiar spirits, ancestral spirits, all of these entities that exist on a lower level of the axis mundi or world tree. And I think we've all moved into the point where low does not mean bad and high or above does not necessarily mean good. And we'll see that in the fact that a lot of these world tree depictions, often we see the roots are in the sky and the branches are on the ground. So we have these two alternative paths for climbing and descending the world tree to access information, to encounter different spiritual entities and allies, to retrieve power, healing, gnosis, whatever you want. It's the world tree, so the world is yours. But they are two different paths, two different distinctions. But like everything, they are opposites of the same coin. They are a cycle. So we can think of this as the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. So while one is positioned skyward and one is positioned earthward, they're part of a greater cycle. So I have a picture of an anaconda and a jaguar. So these are two very important symbolic animals for many cultures, specifically throughout South America, the Amazon. They figure prominently in a lot of the ayahuasca-inspired artwork and other artwork inspired by various different plant medicines and the visions, and very much have indigenous roots and symbolism and meaning, but kind of represent these dual paths as well. So just included those there just for the reference. In addition to the more artistically inscribed world tree on the bottom right, we've also got the Kabbalistic world tree, the Sephiroth, the spheres, and the lightning flash of creation. So what we're seeing here is this kind of zigzagging descent through those different celestial spheres down into the sphere of Malkuth, which represents the earth, the physical world. Also a very kind of serpentine path, which we will see again. The Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, the cyclical sort of movement of energy up and down the world tree. This would be the journey that the soul takes when the body dies and we move on to wherever we move on to. So part of us going down and becoming a part of the earth again, and then more subtle parts leaving and becoming part of the sky or the celestial realms. So with all life, there's this constant sort of upward and downward, inward and outward cycle. It is the cycle of life, death, rebirth, etc. So working with these different energies, these different emanations or manifestations of these celestial forces or chthonic forces, kind of taking advantage or working with that sort of naturally existing cycle or movement. And this is how we are able to, through working with specific spirits and specific plant allies, go to different realms. So, the plant ally that helps you travel to the upper realm, to, if we want to call it Valhalla or Asgard or the whatever, the upper realms, there's going to be, different plant allies that you will work with and will approach you that are in an affinity with those same places or those same vibrations, as opposed to a plant ally that is going to take you down into the underworld or down into the shadow. So it's kind of learning to get a sense for these different, solar and lunar energies kind of running through things. So just some different examples on this kind of idea of the Ouroboros, the solar and lunar cycles, the cycling of energy, the descending and ascending the world tree, and all of those sorts of different things. I've just got some different examples here. Bottom left, we've got a little globe. By the way, all of these images were taken from the internet for demonstrational purposes only. They do not belong to me. I'm not claiming that they belong to me, and they're for educational purposes. So thank you to Alami for this photo of the Earth's magnetic field. So we can think of it, literally as a magnet, two different poles, two different fields of magnetism or energetic fields. One is more projective and upward and outward, while the other is more downward and inward, becoming more concentrated, more solid, while the other one is becoming more and more subtle and more expansive. So we have this magnetic field that is around the planet. It is around the human body, and literally running through everything. And so if we kind of look at the Earth's axis as the center of the world tree, the axis mundi, with the pole stars being the ends of that, and then applying that to kind of that central meridian channel that runs up and down the human body. We see it again. So we have this ability to ascend and descend already within us. And I've also included a picture of a Mongolian yurt. So yurts are super popular in the plant medicine community, and they're used all over the place for ceremonies just because they're really awesome ceremonial spaces. But this is one type, and there are different types from different places, and they go by different names. Just pulled this one off of the internet, but what you'll notice that they all have in common is generally a circular formation with a central fire and then an opening up at the top. So not only does that serve like practical purposes for like not burning the place down, keeping everybody warm, but that also represents and very much is the heart of the space. It is the world tree. It's the axis mundi. It is the prayers and all of the, everything that's happening in that space being sent up and out through that chimney that you can't really see up at the top. So even just considering the fact that heat rises, we have sort of an upward movement that would then be distributed out towards the sides. That air would cool down, it would fall to the floor. So now we're talking about air circulation too. So we've also got like this cyclical sort of movement where everything is coming in, it's moving up, being distributed out, and becoming more dense, and then moving back down. And then it's drawn up, in, out, and down. And we've got this cyclical movement. So in this case, everything's moving up and out, up the world tree, up to the gods, to the spirits, to the ancestors, depending on the tradition where everybody's oriented. But yeah, so just kind of some interesting parallels when we get into working with some of these different energies. So for me, the Poison Path is very much connected to the Garden of Eden. The Old Testament did a really good job of kind of crystallizing and solidifying sort of this this transmission of Luciferian gnosis that happened, eons ago, that we could, associate with the myth of the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the angelic spirits that came to Earth and then impregnated humans that were then, became this race of intelligent beings that was somehow different from the humans that were already here before, depending on what story you look at. But just looking at the fall of Lucifer in general, we get this idea of these angelic beings that did something that someone didn't like, and then they were cast out. So we have this angelic consciousness that starts up in the celestial realms, that then descends the world tree, descends the cosmos, falls in the form of, if you want to look at like the theory of evolution where Earth was populated by micro bacteria, extremophiles that survived on a comet that came from outer space. There's echoes of this everywhere. And what it really comes down to is this transmission of information, this transmission of knowledge. And that comes through the serpent. In this case, and we see it depicted here, it is very much a celestial serpent from the upper realms. If we look closely in the way that it is wrapped around the tree, we'll also see that it has feathers. It's got peacock feathers, which is an important kind of symbol for Luciferian, connected to the Yazidi, and I'm not gonna go into all that, but this idea of the celestial serpent being feathered, is kind of a representation for the transmission of this forbidden knowledge. So the celestial serpent will pop up again. It's not the first time that we see this. We also, interestingly, will usually see the serpent is wrapped around either the center of the tree, or usually if it's wrapped around one of the people, it's wrapped around Eve. But there's generally this spiraling kind of wrapping motion. If we look at the top of the central picture, there is the sun and the moon. in addition to the little clip art sun and moon that I popped on there. So kind of representing these solar and lunar energies. If we go down to sort of the very bottom of the tree, there's even a little skull in this work by Ernst Fuchs. So kind of representing, the celestial and the chthonic power of the serpent. Very interesting. To the left, we have the staff of Asclepius, often confused with Mercury's caduceus, the double snakes with wings. Both of them are used in modern medicine and have been used, throughout the history of medicine to kind of act as a symbol for the practice. Going all the way back to Asclepius, the sort of patron deity, demigod of medicine. But it is important to note that he's generally depicted with that snake. So snakes are very much, kind of intertwined with medicine as much as they are with magic. And it's no mistake that it's that way. So we're seeing some repeating patterns here with the spirals, the transmission of knowledge through the world tree, through the axis mundi, into the human body from the celestial realms. That could possibly be an explanation for where our genetic information came from in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit more about DNA in another slide or two, but it's very much this coiling, serpentine motion that I think everybody can see. And then on the right-hand side, have a diagram of a electromagnetic wave. So electromagnetic waves or fields are comprised of two different components. There's the magnetic field component and there's the electrical field component. So when these two come together, they create an electromagnetic field. These are present in everything. They are present in every cell. Our bodies have an electromagnetic field. The earth has an electromagnetic field. And those are all expressed in these sort of helixing spirals or cycles. I mean, get really crazy into, the whole wonders of DNA, just considering like the fact that we can't really see it, we can't really measure it, like we can code it and know that it's there and it can tell us things about things, but looking at it, and if we were to actually take, the genetic information, the actual DNA, like in these mitochondria and stretch them out to their full length, I don't remember what planet it was, but it could stretch from the Earth to that planet like numerous times because of how much like information is crammed into these tiny, 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 tiny DNA molecules. So tiny that they're not measurable by the visible light spectrum. So technically we're made up of every cell, these vast amounts of genetic information made out of electromagnetic fields that's technically invisible. So that's a whole thing to wrap your mind around. So here, just a few more examples of celestial and chthonic snakes. Chthonic being associated with the underworld, the lower realms, the earth, the ancestors, land spirits, things like that, and celestial being more things that fly and float and like to be up in the sky. The feathered serpent, the sky serpent, celestial serpent is a theme in a lot of different cultures, and I've put an Aztec sculpture here on the left where we can see the feathers on the serpent Quetzalcoatl is a serpent deity that was important to the Aztecs. That was a winged, feathered serpent. And it's something that we see, popping up throughout the Americas, and I'm sure other cultures as well. To the complete opposite side on the right, got another example of these kind of intertwining forces. So snakes very much about, rebirth, regeneration. They represent sexual energy, kundalini, very primal forces. So what we see here are two snakes intertwined, of course, reminiscent of the DNA strand, black snake on the right, and then a lighter snake, which is red, but I'm calling it white on the left. And this is a piece of Australian Aboriginal artwork. So we see that this motif of the snake is just everywhere. And then here in the center, a painting artist's rendition of Lilith. And she is, well, maybe that's Eve. Woman with snake wrapped around. Again, just sort of echoing that spiral, the connection between this forbidden knowledge and women, which we'll see plays a big part in kind of the Poison Path story as well. So what is the Poison Path, and should it even be called that? Well, I don't know. I think that, it is going to be very different depending on who you ask, because there's all sorts of different approaches, all sorts of different interpretations, and all sorts of reasons for seeking this information out. And it's, that's totally cool. That's open for everyone. But just kind of looking at where did the Poison Path start as a term? Who is kind of the first person to use it to describe people working with psychoactive and consciousness altering plants and fungi, but not simply the feel-good psychedelics and psychoactives that were already, ubiquitous at the time, but also kind of looking at some of these, maybe that have a little bit more sinister of a reputation, or some that maybe haven't been worked with as frequently or as openly in a while, namely the nightshades, or etc., fill in the blank. So the Poison Path as a term to kind of describe what this is and what's been happening was first coined by an author, ethnobotanist, poet named Dale Pendle, who passed away a few years ago, but he left behind some really influential books that have gone on to sort of inform a lot of the work that people have been doing on the Poison Path. They are written in a very kind of poetic language, not necessarily, academic or phytochemical textbooks or anything like that. But they do introduce like some really interesting ideas when it comes to working with these plants as allies, and kind of exploring some of the more spiritual properties and implications that come with this work. So at its core, it can be just a passion for poisonous plants, animals, and fungi, because they are really cool and just really interesting. So from like a biological, organic chemistry standpoint, the Poison Path could just be, a passion for studying all the Earth's form of poisonous creatures. There's even poisonous mineralogy. So it's its whole thing. And while the Poison Path, it is very much about the use of ritual entheogens and psychedelic states and things like that. You know, really focusing in on that poisonous component is just something that I feel like it is important to kind of keep the focus on, or at least keep talking about, you know, because it's so easy for this to kind of just shoehorn you into, you know, some kind of we'll get to it in a later slide. Medicine, magic, plant spirit communion, spirit healing, or any other call to work with these allies in study or practice. You know, so depending on how you approach them and your approach to them is going to, you know, kind of influence and inform the way that the spirit and the way that the medicine presents itself to you. You know, so if you are approaching them for, you know, for healing and for this understanding that poison is very much like this spectrum of constructs and things, you know, and that they do have these really profound sort of spiritual healing properties that we can tap into if we can sort of get past some of that conditioning. You know, the plant spirits are very gracious and can manifest in, you know, what we would consider a very celestial, very, you know, love and light and wanting to, you know, open all of these doors and help you through all these things sort of situation. But if you are attracted to them through the darker side, they're going to manifest in that way as well. So all different, you know, perceptions and sort of ways that these plants come through to us. So in a lot of ways, they are shapeshifters, and they are acting as mirrors for us, really. The poison path could be a personal exploration of literal and ephemeral, quote, poisons in concept and practice. I call this occult toxicology. So this does not suggest or imply poisoning yourself, ingesting poisonous plants, poisoning other people, or doing anything stupid and reckless. So just really looking at and kind of picking apart this Pandora's box of poison. And I think it's a different box for everyone to open. And that is a whole sort of mystic exploration or journey in and of itself. So the poison path is not limited to one culture or tradition, and its wisdom is not contained by one stream of gnosis. So when this term first came out and started to be thrown around, it was kind of used in the context of neo-paganism, specifically Eurocentric, Euro-influenced pagan traditions in the Western Hemisphere, etc. We see a little quote showing that sentiment down at the bottom by Dale Pendle from an interview in Cabinet Magazine, which I'll link in the Google Drive. That says, I am in touch with some people who favor the tropanes, which are the nightshade alkaloids. He says that mostly pagans seem to like them, and that hopefully they can spare me some of the field work. So he's jokingly saying that because the symptoms of tropane alkaloid intoxication are not always comfortable or pleasant, but also making the association with neo-paganism. So I think in that way, you know, we see this sort of first kind of distinction with the poison path being a name for plants from a certain part of the world, or people working with, you know, specific plants within a specific cultural context, I guess. The witch is a very important image to the poison path. It does not mean that everyone that wants to work with poisonous plants has to be a witch, or that you have to do witchcraft with them. It does not mean that by, working with these plants as allies that you are, necessarily exposing yourself to any of these energies or spirits, if that's not something that you're wanting to do, if that's not your reason for wanting to work with them. But they are very much a inseparable part of the, not just the poison path story, but the story of herbal medicine and traditional medicine. And the witch has been the vessel for poison gnosis since antiquity. So if it wasn't for this scapegoat, for lack of a better word, that has acted as a container and vessel for all of this poison gnosis, I don't think we would have it. And that started as far back as ancient Greece, going way back into antiquity, with the pharmacout. We see it in the figures Circe, Medea, the very earliest of the witch archetypes that we can find in the Western world, where writings and stories have survived. We can go back even further than that to Gula in Sumeria, the was referred to as the prince of women, a deity of healing, but also a deity of poison. It's kind of an even earlier sort of archetype for this idea of the witch, of this this powerful being that was, simultaneously poison and medicine all in one. And so the sort of the traditional witch, or the stereotypical witch, or what we could even call the biblical witch, this idea that comes down to us through all of these different filters, and the most recent one kind of being like the medieval witch craze, inquisitorial period, etc. This form has kind of transformed and come to us in different ways throughout history, and we can take that all the way back to that original fall, the dissemination of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, and the connection that kind of brings up as far as the fact that the snake is literally on a tree and it's giving her an apple. The snake's not the only one that's kind of getting the bad rap there. The apple gets it, the tree gets it, the garden gets it. It's very much an affront to the natural world in general, and really kind of, I think, shows this first shift away from, this more matriarchal or goddess-centered, golden age or earlier world that was kind of wiped out as we started to switch over from, hunting and gathering and living connected to the land and etc. So the witch has been the container for that all along, and is manifested in a number of different forms. The witch was seen as both a spiritual contagion and a physical person. So always seen as a threat from the outside, sometimes, but not always connected to a physical person. We see a lot of these nocturnal spirits and hags and nightmares and Lamia and Lilitum and different spirits of death and disease that come in the night. Those are kind of the earliest, I would say, primeval memory of what would eventually become the witch, as this nocturnal spirit idea kind of merges with this practitioner of traditional herbal medicines. So no, the poison path is not, a witchcraft tradition, but it's very much something that is a repeated theme throughout the witchcraft mythos. And that does not just go for European witchcraft either. So we've got the cover of Beneficium by Daniel Schulke, who was kind of, after Dale Pendle, was really the one that I would say kind of popularized, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, or what do they call it? Not appropriated, reappropriated, this connection between witchcraft and the poison path and etc. So moving on, I have included a picture of a sculpture of the goddess Hygeia, who would be daughter of Asclepius. So earlier we saw the staff of Asclepius with the snake whirling around it. Here we see her statue where she's literally collecting the venom into a bowl to make medicine. So both of their statues are typically depicted with some kind of a snake that they're making the medicine out of. So I think that that's a really interesting kind of correlation to sort of like the medicine cup that we see in various different plant medicine ceremonies, from tea ceremonies to cacao to ayahuasca. This sacred kind of collection vessel for the medicine or the poison or the pharmacon or whatever we would like to call it. So poison in various forms was also closely associated with the witch and used in magical contexts. Similar to witchcraft, the knowledge and use of toxins from the most ancient of times has been prescribed by law and religious decree. Like the witch, whose presence in communities was regarded as insidious and polluting, the presence of poison is often undetectable, lurking unseen until it has exacted a toll in victims. This shared continence of the grotesque inspires fear and awe, and has animated the violent aversion to both the witch and poison over time. So lots of parallels, and I think a lot of us that identify as witches can relate to both of those, whether we use the word witch or we use the word poison. There have been times in my past where I was the witch and the poison, and very much, made to feel that way. Sometimes, those were the literal words that were used as descriptors. Sort of this analogy between, just this harmful, unwanted influence, and it's sort of like contagious, infecting effects on the perceived effects on the people around them, etc., for being different or difficult or whatever, a teenager. So yeah, it's just something that I think is really relatable, and it is important because that is why a lot of witches come to witchcraft, because they have been made to feel that way. Veneficium concerns poisons as a theoretical and practical component of the witchcraft of history, as well as their echoes in modern occult practices, particularly those known as the sabbatic current. So we'll talk a little bit more about sabbatic witchcraft and traditional and all that stuff in a little bit, but just mainly that, it is a theoretical and practical component. So yes, there is the making of medicine, the creation of flying ointments, working with formulas, growing the plants. But what you'll find when you're going through all of these, practical motions, that there's all of this information and thought processing that is going on. For a long time, I thought it was just crazy, or that it was just ADD, or that I just had like a real chatty brain because I spend too much time by myself. But literally, when I'm working, making my formulas, packing orders, working on classes, even like leading up to stuff like that, like there are voices, there are conversations, there are all of these different spirits kind of helping me to work through all of these more theoretical and subtle kind of ideas and implications that pop up around all of this. Oh, and here we are. This is a book that was published by Koppelbahn Publishing in the UK. They are no longer in existence, so you might still be able to find copies of the book if you're interested. But as far as it pertains to like the poison path and any kind of like plants and fungi information, this is pretty much like the only page that matters. So what we're seeing are two photocopies of a letter from Roy Bowers or Robert Cochrane to his coven, or to the other members of the group that he was working with. And I left the book in my bedroom, so I'm going to read the tiny part. Okay. So this is just kind of in conversation about working with different entheogenic plants and fungi in ritual practice. So he was born in 1931 and died in 1966. So this conversation would have been going on like right around the time of the witchcraft revival in the 1950s, 1940s, 50s in the United Kingdom, that would eventually go on to influence the witchcraft revival in America. So why are plants and fungi and other psychoactive and entheogenic materia not more of a part of modern witchcraft? Beyond just the legality, even theoretically, they're almost non-existent until we reach a certain point. There are numerous books by different ethnobotanists, psychonauts, ritual magicians, and other people that explore this, but is very much kept out of modern witchcraft. Not even a Wicca witchcraft thing. It's just not. It just hasn't been. And I think part of that is maybe just like a modern sort of, like, we're just very divorced from herbalism and plant medicine in general, but I don't think that necessarily applies to witches because we're so connected to the natural world. So like, why was this stuff not talked about more? Well, I think that there is a reason for that. And I think in that reason is why we see this connection between what we're calling traditional witchcraft, folk witchcraft, Western witchcraft, versus the initiatory traditions of Gardner and Sanders, etc. And I am not initiated in any of those traditions. I've always been a very, staunchly solitary left-hand path, do-it-myself practitioner. But from what I have read in both Gardner's writings in Witchcraft Today, as well as what I'm about to read here, it shows, I think, a core and key split between the two driving forces behind the witchcraft revival. So looking at this letter, so they're talking about rituals for flying and exploring these four castles that had been discovered kind of as like four cross-quarter And then goes on to say, therefore, I suggest that we proceed with a series of controlled experiments involving the use of hallucinogenic plants and fungus. Properly controlled and directed, these experiments will not be harmful. In something, I shall be the first guinea pig, and nobody is obliged to follow me. Goes on to talk about the castles a little bit, and then mentions these drugs are to be found in butonin, I believe is how he spells it, bufonin, toad venom, etc., fly agaric, henbane. Let me see, there's the only mentions. Okay, so literally a discussion about incorporating different psychoactive plants and fungi into their rituals. And these are essentially kind of documents and kind of just going through the history of the Royal Windsor Coven and the Regency, which were these two magical organizations associated with Robert Cochrane. The Cochrane tradition eventually went on to become the clan of Tubal-Cain, which is a traditional witchcraft, cultist coven, and other subsequent sabbatic and traditional witchcraft practices. These have all been influenced by his work. So if you're not familiar with the story of Robert Cochrane, he died when he was 35 years old. I will be 35 years old in a short amount of time. So that's interesting. But he was also fascinated by the nightshade alkaloids, particularly known for his connection to Atropa belladonna, and it's been suggested that it may have played a role in his death. And there's kind of some murky things to sift through there, but there is an article about it that I'll put in the links called "A Poisoned Chalice: The Death of Robert Cochrane." So he's kind of one of the fathers, I guess, of a more traditional, with a lowercase t, traditional British witchcraft. So what we would see, more as like turning the compass, working with the horned god, toad bone rituals, things coming out of medieval witch folklore and the like. So he was sort of the one that was working with entheogenic plant medicine, while Gardner was kind of on the opposite side, much more in favor of more energetic visualization, breath work, tantric types of practices for raising energy and altering consciousness. So just two very different approaches. And I think that had Robert Cochrane survived, especially if he made it to the 80s, I think things would have been way different. So, there is a connection between the use of ritual entheogens and traditional witchcraft. You may not resonate with it. It may not be your reason for wanting to work with these plants, but it is there nonetheless. So again, we see that medicine cup on the top, and I'm not sure. I think that might actually be a cacao cup on top. I'm not sure if it's ayahuasca or cacao. But the bottom, we've got a brew going of ayahuasca, which is the combination of the leafy greens, the Psychotria viridis, which has the DMT, and the Banisteriopsis caapi vine, which you see in the little brown pieces. That is the MAOI that makes it all happen. To the right, you'll see a really large vine there, the Banisteriopsis caapi. And you'll notice that it is known as a liana, or a woody vine. So it's got that woody kind of barky outer coating. very sturdy, very strong. But you'll notice that it's made up of all of these almost kind of like separate parts twisting and twining together. So this is the vine of the soul, very reminiscent of serpents, snakes, the DNA helix, just looking at the plant correspondences, the sympathetic, the visual cues that tell you what the plant is associated with. And the word for it's escaping right now. But anyway, it's a spiral. It looks like a snake. It looks like a DNA strand. It's the ayahuasca vine. So a sort of parallel correlation to the poison path. We've got the snake connection. We've got the psychoactive plants. We've got the poisonous association. So here, the plants are not necessarily described as poisonous. They are described as medicine. So we see a very different kind of worldview on the power plants, the potent plants, the plants that, you know, maybe they make you vomit, but they also give you visions, connect you to your ancestors, help you heal your trauma, all of these things, where Westerners will get hung up on, or not even Westerners, scratch that, but, you know, people will get hung up on the vomiting part. And all of a sudden, oh, it's poisonous, it's bad for you, stay away from it, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know, to other people, that is pleasurable, it's purging, it's healing, it's part of the process. So we see these just really interesting paradigms kind of coming together and butting heads when we start to look into these things. So as a poison path practitioner, as somebody that studies poisonous, quotation marks, and medicinal or powerful plants or psychoactive plants, you cannot study ethnopharmacology, ethnobotany, you know, the traditional ceremonial use of plants without coming across, you know, the traditional medicines of other parts of the world. And the majority of what we know about that has come to us through anthropologists, scientists, botanists, white people that have gone to these parts of the world over time and studied with these people, or in some cases, you know, just taken the knowledge and the information for other purposes. But regardless, that is how it first comes to us. Now that the world is becoming smaller and the plants are moving more and more people around, you know, we're getting some different perspectives, different transmissions, and different understandings of these plants and the people that have been stewards of their knowledge, their spirits, their medicine, since the beginning, and to whom, you know, that knowledge and that work, you know, rightfully belongs. So it is, you know, it's very much a part of the study. You know, even just looking at datura. Datura is unimportant, you know, witching herb. It's maybe connected to the flying ointments, depending on when you believe that it showed up in Europe and where it came from. But looking at the Americas, it's one of the most important ceremonial plants, north, south, and central. So when we're looking and exploring datura as a plant ally in the English language, we can't without coming across these other cultures and these other you know, streams of transmission of plant knowledge. And so it's always been important for me to try and distinguish without it seeming, you know, like I'm trying to draw a line and say, you know, this is ours, this is theirs, because that's like the complete opposite of what I'm trying to do. But to present them together, to uplift them both, but to also hold space for both of them. you know, for a long time, I really didn't have any interest in ayahuasca, San Pedro, um, any of these other, you know, psychedelic kind of plant medicines. You know, I had some bad experiences when I was a teenager. I got exposed to some really dark energy, some really dangerous people when I was in some of these hallucinogenic states that really stuck with me for a really long time. And so that was kind of another reason for my interest in the nightshades or other means of accessing these states of consciousness that weren't going to put me back into that hell dimension that I didn't want to go to. So I kind of stayed away from, you know, indigenous plant medicine, psychedelics, you know, however you want to describe that. So that's, you know, kind of another reason, I guess, of my focus on the European witching herbs, I guess. Which come to find out their states of delirium are much worse than any bad acid trip or mushroom trip that you could ever go on. But yeah, the point is, I guess, just to hold space for both and to, you know, not try and make them all one thing. Because as we will see in this slide, people have been coming over from Europe for centuries and just having the most horrible things to say about these plants. And we see one example, the quote to the left, which is in regard to guayusa, which is an ilex species that is brewed into a communal beverage that's drank on almost a daily basis, just like we drink coffee or tea. It's drank before hunting, before ceremony, during ceremony, after ceremony, at weddings, lovers drink it. It's a social drink. It's got caffeine in it, and it peps you up. It makes you want to talk. It's really great for processing and cycling energy between groups of people. But this quote, which I've taken from the Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants by Christian Reich, was made in 1682. There was a Spanish Jesuit explorer person who I don't even bother to remember their name, that was writing to some viceroy or something with the Spanish, but basically said that they mixed together all of these diabolic herbs with guayusa, the plant in question, also implying, you know, datura, banisteriopsis copy, tobacco, etc., which we'll see in the original quote, that was also invented by the devil, and allowed this to boil until only a little remains. The quintessence of evil, and the faith of those who drank it has been twisted by the devil through the fruit of enchantment. So this was in 1682. The Europeans brought the devil, and I don't know how these people would have been working with this plant that the devil supposedly created for as many centuries as they were prior to the arrival of these European conquistadors, for that to be a possibility. But we've got that association right there. And this is for something that is totally like on the scale of psychoactivity and like what's poisonous, what's innocuous. Like this is something that like children drink, pregnant women drink. The guayusa, you know, not necessarily all of the other additives, but the ilex, the guayusa, like this is just something that people drink on a daily basis, and they still do. So just kind of an interesting example of this grossness that has happened. And I think it's through that, processing through some of that grossness and looking at this diabolic association, this poison, this nastiness that has been thrown at these like poor plant allies, that we can finally like process through the poisonous part and get back to the good part and get back to, you know, where we originally should have stayed in the first place. So the Hibaro is what I've seemed to kind of find basically a Spanish sort of shortcut for pronouncing the name Shuar or Ashuar, referring to a number of different groups in Peru and Ecuador. But interestingly, these people were also, according to the Wikipedia page, one of the only indigenous people known to have revolted against the Spanish Empire successfully and deny any and all attempts by the Spaniards to conquer them. So the Shuar still live where they have always lived. They still practice their indigenous plant medicine. So it's interesting that they were described as, the most fearsome and warlike, tribes in the Amazon, and really they've kind of acted as like this last sort of bastion for the encroachment of European colonization. So if anything, just a last kind of comment on the previous slide, if anything can connect the poison path to indigenous plant medicine ceremonies and such, it's sort of this reverse engineering through the exploration of some of these filters that have been put on by other people and other intermediaries that have kind of twisted and tainted the original uses and original medicine of these plants. So kind of reverse engineering that taintedness that has been caused. That is part of the work for me as well. And this is very much occult toxicology. So we see this in spagyrics, which is a type of tincture making of herbal medicine, of early chemistry. Spagyrics basically meaning to separate and to draw out. So this would have originally been the first poison path. It would have been this alchemical separation of drawing out the medicine, separating from the poison, and creating this energetically, spiritually whole end result that had all of these different medicinal, spiritual, powerful properties. And it was through the creation, through the separation, and the different processes and the different energetic and spiritual states that correlated to, that you're actually doing the work of separating the poisons within yourself, separating out these lower vibrations, these negative attachments and ancestral contracts and things that just bog us down. And those are very much spiritual poisons. So just considering all of these things as abstract concepts, energetic influences, and occult forces as we are doing this work. So it is not without risk, and you are bumping up against some very powerful, very primal energies, ideas, and forces, and that does not come without sacrifice. It does not come without pain. But it does, lead to new understanding, and it is definitely part of the, sort of death and rebirth process. So very, very much, yes, poison is medicine, and yes, poison is in the dose, but it goes much deeper than that. And that's kind of the thing that we hear parroted the most often on the poison path. The mantra of poison is medicine. Poison is in the dose, and yes, that's all great and that's true, but there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more beauty, there's just a lot more there than that. So kind of exploring, just looking throughout, history as our ideas about poison, and the words that we've used to express those ideas, how they've changed and what they've been influenced by. And just kind of getting an idea for, what this all is. So in the ancient world, poison was very much seen as kind of a, or at least it was publicly portrayed in this way, that it was a cowardly thing, that it was not manly for one to poison another, because even the greatest warrior could be taken down by, the littlest bit of poison. So it just completely like threw off the scales, threw off the social paradigm, the social construct. So knowledge of poison was very much, a type of power. It was something that was kept secret, something that was feared, something that was looked down upon and, demonized throughout the community. But these people that were known for having that knowledge were very much feared, but also respected as much as they were feared. So in the ancient world, before we really understood toxicology and neurochemistry and how these things were affecting us, poison had a very malefic and sinister kind of vibe to it. It was very much a form of psychological warfare as it was, an actual weapon. So we've got all these ideas about miasma or evil air or evil influence or, flying poisons, flying venoms, which is an early kind of intuition of bacteria, disease pathology. We could consider it like the occult counterpoint to like microorganisms in this miasma, which connects to like disease and how we care for and dispose of, or where we keep the dead, and why that is the way that it is, and how proximity to the dead can affect the living, and just all of these different early medical ideas that very much show us the thoughts sort of surrounding the abilities and influence and power that poisonous substances had. So they were all kind of blended together, poison, medicine, intoxicants, all very much seen as sort of one and the same. At the bottom center, we see a Scythian archer. The Scythians were an ancient nomadic people in the Eurasian steppes that were known for their not only their battle prowess, but also their use and knowledge of poison. They really took advantage of the psychological side of biological warfare, making sure that the entire Mediterranean, Africa, Asia, all the surrounding area was aware of this poison that they created that was called Scythicon. Scythicon was known throughout the ancient world, and it was created by taking all of these poisonous creatures and putting them in a vessel, burying it, closing it, basically just allowing those poisonous creatures to all attack each other or do whatever they do until basically they all die, and then the bodies are left in there. That's allowed to putrefy. They would also add human like feces, urine, blood, all of these things. And they also had a really interesting, like really early for the times, plasma separation centrifuge that they would take blood, separate the plasma and put that in their poison. And that's what they would dip their arrows in. So not only was it like toxic as far as it containing venoms and poisonous plants, but it's also got these biological toxins of like bacteria, E. coli, and who knows like what else being in there with all of these biological components. So everybody knew about that, and everybody knew how terrible it was to die if you got hit by one of them, because if the poison didn't kill you, the gangrene and the infection definitely would. It would just do it much slower and much more painfully. So they used this to their advantage, and the Scythians were also known for their practice of witchcraft and sorcery, knowledge of the occult and the arcane, very similar to like the witches of Thessaly, who were also known for their knowledge of poisonous plants. So it's almost like these cultures that were not necessarily in ancient Greece but nearby that had very knowledge of poisonous plants, or there were places where poisonous plants grew. They kind of became seen almost as like these hotbeds for like black magic and all sorts of other just sinful things. You'll notice in the picture with the archer, the Scythian archers had special little bags that they kept their arrows in, that had a flap on them. They were especially made to basically keep the archers from stabbing themselves with their poisoned arrows. They also carried like a special little vial that they kept the poison in, and had a special arrow design that they're also known for, that made it really hard to pull the arrows out and all of that. So we see the words veneficium. So obviously it looks like venom, which we learned in presentation with Misha the other day, that venomous creatures are the ones with fangs, and poisonous creatures are the ones that secrete. Basically, venom comes to you, and poison, you have to drink it or ingest it, which is an interesting kind of connection between the word venom. We see here Venere, which is for Venus, so it does have a Venusian association, because the first poisons, the first intoxicants were love potions. But we also see an interesting connection to Venere, or ven conmigo, which is come with me, or vini vidi vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. So we're getting to this root word, which basically means to come, to arrive, saying like, come here, come to me. So I'm just kind of theorizing on this just because I've been thinking about it for a couple of days. But with the venom, whether it's shot or expressed, or on an arrow, or a poison dart, or it's coming from a poisonous creature, the venom is coming to you. Ven conmigo, come with me. So it's coming to you. Where with the poison's roots are in potion, potio, something that is drank or drunk, something that's prepared in a vessel, something that actually has to be imbibed or ingested. So it's this interesting sort of distinction between the directionality, or like the method of employment of the venom or the poison, when we look at the etymology. And that maybe is only interesting to like crazy obsessive poison path people like me. But it's just an interesting connection between venom, beneficium, witchcraft, love potions, etc. And then we'll hop over to the right-hand side of the slides, where we see a couple different glyphs, sort of oracle bone glyphs from China, and they represent Gu. We see the top left, the cult of Ku. There's a couple different spellings, a couple different linguistic distinctions that are very interesting to study and to talk about. But basically what I'm getting across with these particular glyphs, because I don't have any background or experience in Eastern language or glyph writing, but from a symbolic point of view, these glyphs for poison or poison magic or black magic or whatever it is being called is symbolic for basically a cup with little snakes or worms or venomous creatures inside. So it's this idea of this poisoned chalice. And this is a symbol for cultivating and creating that poison. In the same way that the Scythians threw all of the venomous creatures into their vat for their poisoned arrows. In the same way that the Venefica prepares a love potion to give to an intended victim or suitor, or whatever, whatever you want to call them. You know, it's this idea of a poisoned vessel. Well, that vessel contains all of that poison, antithetical, anti-life essence. And that to certain people has a very large amount of occult power. That power can be cultivated, it can be tapped into, and people have used it for power, influence, wealth, love, and protection. All of the things that are, you know, most typical for, you know, very just practical needs met kind of witchcraft coming through the cultivation of this poison. This kind of gets into, you know, a little bit more obscure out there poison path topics, but Kenneth Grant, he writes a little bit about the cult of Ku and poison in Chinese lore, does a better job explaining it in Cults of Shadow. Also see things popping up in the, nope, we're not going to go there. We're just going to jump to the next slide. Popular poisons. This is my favorite part. So poisons popping up in popular culture, in TVs, movies, books. This is not a new thing. Poisons have been a literary tool, a dramatic prop for centuries. I think that humans have always kind of been aware of the dramatic side of poison in their storytelling. You know, we even see that in one of the earliest stories of poison, where Hercules slays the Hydra and dips his arrows in the blood, the venom that the Hydra spills, and then they're forever poisoned. And that was kind of like the origin story for poisoning arrows. You know, so it's not a new thing, goes way back, but it's interesting to see how and where it pops up and what kind of connections people are making to it, what that means for us as poison path practitioners, as occultists, as people interested in exploring the more subtle side of these things. So it is no coincidence that poison is as ubiquitous in the collective subconscious as it is in the world today, especially now. Humans have always been simultaneously afraid of and obsessed with death. I don't care who you ask, who they are, what their views are. Everybody's afraid of dying. Nobody wants to die. Everybody thinks about death, and it's just part of being alive. You can deny it, you can say you're not, you can say that you're accepting of it, but bottom line, we're constantly moving closer towards death, and we know it. Okay. So from femme fatales to vengeful lovers to protective mothers, poison is often wielded by feminine figures. And I think that's maybe part of what originally attracted me to poisons, to the poison path. You know, some of these early themes, you know, just growing up with a single mom and difficulty with my dad not being the greatest guy because of things that he was dealing with. And so this image of, you know, femme fatale, of just a powerful female figure was very empowering to me for some reason, and still is. One of my favorites is Gillian Owens, the epitome of 1990s witch fashion and Australian treasure. So just a scene from her in Practical Magic. So this was one of like the earliest probably pop culture references to poison that I remember, and probably a lot of people my age remember, is in Practical Magic. She's using her aunt's belladonna or deadly nightshade to basically drug her boyfriend. Her boyfriend is also not a great guy. There's a childhood parallel. Basically to help get like a better night's sleep, but then she accidentally kills him. And I think like we all know the storyline, but it's just very much Gillian Owens embodies like that femme fatale, belladonna, atropa kind of spirit. Definitely for me, maybe not for everybody. But you know, that's kind of the badass belladonna energy that I feel and I see when I work with the plant. We hop over to Ingrid. She's holding some, it is white oleander. They actually did a good job in that one. I think it actually looks like white oleander. Was a book made movie. Again, she murders her abusive boyfriend. And the story is basically about her daughter's journey after that. But Astrid was a very artistic, very witchy, very ethereal, kind of a mother figure. And she just straight out poisons this guy. So white oleander was another very early poison reference for me. To heal or to harm. This is another common mantra that is heard, or you know, one that knows how to heal, knows how to harm, etc., etc., etc. Poisons are wielded by both the villain and the victim. So here we see the poisoned apple being dipped by the witch into the cauldron on Snow White. Below that, we see Captain Barbossa, infatuated by his poisonous frog collection. And then the image of Pan's Labyrinth and the mythical mandragore that was used to help try and heal the girl's mother. So very much about the human moving the plant around. Plants don't move on their own. Plants don't really have an agenda beyond being plants. So it's really about us. It's really about what we're doing with them, how we're using them, how we're employing them. It has been brought to my attention recently the implications of working with plants, working with spirits that have been used to harm. That was something that was said to me verbatim that I don't necessarily take offense to, because it's been a really good like learning experience of thinking like for a second, like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like I've just let all of this darkness and all of these horrible things into my life because I want to work with poisonous plants because they've been, you know, because they're dark and spooky and have been used to harm people, that now I'm somehow, you know, tainted because of that. You know, this coming from a plant medicine practitioner, a magical practitioner, was just a really interesting perspective and just a reminder of how even within the most accepting and aware communities of magical plant people, that there still is real visceral and primal fear surrounding what I do and what I work with. And I think in a lot of ways, I am kind of projecting, you know, some of these qualities that are associated with the plants, projecting them, throwing them out at other people, and you know, their reactions are their reactions, but it's given me a really interesting kind of perspective and caused me to think, you know, am I doing something harmful? No. No. So the intentional harm, not talking about accidental poisoning and things like that. The intentional harm caused by poisonous flora, fauna, fungi, is our baggage. It is not the plants. So the reason that I work with plants and energies and things that have been used to cause harm are because in many ways, we've all been used to cause harm, to harm ourselves, to harm one another, to harm the planet. We've all been the pawns of some other greater or more oppressive power that has forced us to act in a way that has hurt someone, hurt ourselves, hurt the people that we love, whatever. Um, we can own that and move on from it, knowing that it came from the place that it came from, not attaching ourselves too much to it. In the same way, that many of these plants have been used to harm. Okay, well, that wasn't the plant's fault that, King Duncan decided to kill an entire invading army using, meat or beer or whatever that he put a bunch of belladonna in. That wasn't belladonna's fault. It's not hemlock's fault that it was used to kill Socrates. Amazing philosophical mind. It's not Datura's fault for the countless stories of people and teenagers and whomever, accidentally poisoning themselves and going crazy for a few days. It's not. So to demonize and to show fear to these innocent beings is something that I guess I really resonate with and really kind of breaks my heart that one living creature would treat another living creature like that, as far as like perceiving it as this dark and malicious thing. And I think that really has been like a lot of kind of crux and why I've come to the path in the way that I have, is to kind of process and understand some of this darkness that I've felt that's been applied to me, or that I've held on to for whatever reason, just to, coming to a deeper understanding of it. So it's this perception of harm, darkness, and danger that gets people all riled up. And since we're talking about poisons in popular culture, I called this slide "Making It Up as They Go." So there's been quite a few instances. Don't watch that much TV, but I've noticed some discrepancies. I've also like appreciated some of the planty shout outs and things that I've seen. So here's just a few of them. Top left, we've got Miriam from Vikings Valhalla, season 2, recently aired. So I don't want to spoil too much of it, but she's from Constantinople. She is an astronomer and she's super smart, and she has a really interesting kind of affinity and storyline with Atropa belladonna. Not so much a discrepancy, other than I think that the plant that she was picking from when she was talking about it was not Atropa belladonna, but she was a pretty cool character. So no negative commentary on her. But yeah, some interesting connections with fate and facing death, and sort of the inexorability, the unavoidability of fate, and how we cannot necessarily control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we face it. It's just a really cool message. So poisonous plants in popular culture, they usually designate some kind of supernatural influence or represent the unknown, as we see in the sort of top center picture, labeled Jimson weed or Datura stramonium. This is from a movie called The Autopsy of Jane Doe. a spooky horror movie about an autopsy. um, Basically, long story short, they find a datura flower in her stomach or lodged in her somewhere, um, and that plays a role in sort of the supernatural happenings that start to come out in this mysterious autopsy. That you think in the beginning, like it's just like a murder mystery crime sort of scenario, but then the datura flower gets removed, and then things start to get a little weird. So just it just is interesting to me when these people making these movies that really probably don't have any knowledge or connection kind of stumble upon one of these plants and throw it in there. Or, I like to think that maybe they have some poison plant knowledgeable person on staff that's just really getting a kick out of putting poisonous plants in scenes of shows and movies. But okay, so then we come down to, let's do bottom left. I just saw this one. This is on the Shadow and Bone season 2, so don't want to spoiler alert that either. But the character Wylan is admiring these blue, they look like blue morpho butterflies, so we could get into the psychedelic symbolism on that. They are feeding on these red flowers, and sort of the storyline, basically the butterflies are processing the poison from the flowers so that they can be pollinated. Otherwise, nothing else would pollinate them. So it's kind of like this romantic one sacrificing for the other so that both can thrive. And it's just like a really beautiful moment. And Wyland's a cutie, but the flowers are definitely hibiscus, not datura, as they are called repeatedly in the show. But I think it would have been a liability probably to put a big blooming datura plant right there with their actors, because I know they pay them a lot of money. But they could have at least picked a white flower, or did what they did in the next scene. So to the right of that, we see a pale brown-haired woman smelling a flower. You can't see it, but behind her is her date, Dorian Gray. This is from the show Penny Dreadful. They're kind of on a little weird goth girl date, going to the glass houses, looking at all the plants, and he, in Casanova form, points out the deadly nightshade and equates it to her beauty as well as her dangerousness. Because if you're familiar with the storyline, like she's plagued by demons and vampires and all of these things, but she's really like this badass female figure that's been through a lot, and she's just a really powerful character. But the flowers are not belladonna flowers. They're not Atropa belladonna. Those are giant, like Dr. Seuss sized bittersweet nightshade flowers, or Solanum dulcamara. So just kind of an interesting, like, I love it when they get the things wrong and then everybody is misidentifying plants. And I could totally trace this to, like, somebody probably did a Google search for Atropa belladonna flowers, or belladonna deadly nightshade. Maybe don't use the scientific name. And you can do it right now, and the same thing will happen, where you'll get pictures. A few of them might be Atropa belladonna, but you're going to see a lot of these purple star-shaped flowers with the bright yellow stamen, and those are Solanum dulcamara. So totally different properties, totally different folklore. They are both in the nightshade family. I think it was maybe just the star-shaped purple flowers were a little bit better for TV than maybe the real belladonna flowers, because they're a little inconspicuous. But you can totally tell, like, that plant's fake too. Totally fake. So they can symbolize dangerous love. So this thing that is, seductive and desirable, but at the same time dangerous, toxic, intoxicating. Love is often described in the same way as poison. And then we've got this sort of symbiosis, the butterflies processing the poison for the flowers because they love them, which is really nice. Bottom right, last one. This is from brand new cherry flavor. I don't have any specific plants to point out on this one because it's been a little while since I've watched it. But if we want to call her a witch, even though she's maybe like a reincarnated, shaman of some sorts, Boro lives in a jungle greenhouse, basically. So there's lots and lots of implications of plant medicine in this film series, brand new cherry flavor, just with the surrounding plants, and then also like the hallucinogenic states that this girl is going through. Sorry, I don't remember the actor's name, but it's a really awesome show. It's really messed up. But she goes through this whole kind of process, like death and rebirth process, and it just gets crazier and crazier. But it's very much like pulling in themes of like Amazonian plant medicine and psychedelics and hallucinogens and brujeria and witchcraft and just all of this sort of swirling around in this crazy weirdness. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend that you watch. But it is also, and this kind of represents reclaiming personal power. So fate and facing death. So this person is going through like a literal shamanic death. And I think everybody's probably heard about the throwing up the cats and all of that. But it's basically a full circle of her sort of reclaiming her personal power and realization of who she is and how she fits into the cosmos. And so it's just a cool message. So my favorite slide. Oh my gosh, this is my favorite slide. You guys are gonna think I'm just a nutcase after this is all over. And maybe I am, but just kind of going through this idea of cultivating poison and doing it for personal power, for abundance, for protection, for influence. What is more poisonous than social media and the vitriol and the hate and the nastiness that people throw all over the place without any regard for who it's hitting or where they're throwing it or whether it's the time and the place for it. So there's just a lot of spiritual poisons that are floating around. Pollutants environmentally, Wi-Fi, electronically, socially, spiritually, it's everywhere. So how can we process and transmute and cultivate that into something better, something that could be seen as medicine or something transformative? Is kind of the message. So I put this slide up here just as kind of like my attempt at humor. But maybe my connections are a little bit too abstract. But every time I hear this song, it makes me think of poison magic, of the cultivation of goo or creation of these spiritual toxins for their magical properties. Because that's essentially what I think that this song is about, even if it's on a totally subconscious level. So from the artist Megan Thee Stallion, in her performance of the song Her, she says, "All this hate giving me a pretty face. I eat hate, that's why I ain't got a waste. The more hoes hating, more money I'ma make." So this first part, essentially, she's transmuting all of the trolls, all of the negativity, all of those things into her ability to make more money or to be motivated or achieve more, to have that ambition. All of those things, essentially transmuting it into the energy and ability to uplift herself, and to do whatever she wants to do because she's Megan Thee Stallion. And then it goes on to say, "I come in every room and draw attention like a centerpiece." Wasn't going to mention this, but it's just kind of an interesting nerd out to the credence tables or credenza that would have been used during the Renaissance, Middle Ages as a centerpiece to literally warn people if anyone at the dinner party had poisoned the food or drink. Moving on to the next slide. Stepping for a long time, moving like a centipede. So this is just too much. It's just way too much of a connection for it to not be like what I'm saying it is. So we've got the transmutation of this occult, energetic vitriol, this poison essentially that's being sent towards her, transformed into something that she's essentially using to make money. It is powerful. It projects and draws attention to her, and then associating her movements to a centipede, which basically, centipedes very much connected to the poison magic. So just kind of a really interesting way that the spirits like to communicate things to me. So it's everywhere. I can connect pretty much anything to poison. So what does this mean for us and for the plants? Plants want to help us, but they're also good with or without us. This is more about us. So, if we never touched another datura or deadly nightshade or henbane or mandrake ever again, they would all be fine. They would all be totally fine. They would go on about their lives and it would be okay. So this is more about us, not from a selfish point of view, but as far as like why these spirits are coming forward, like it's obviously to hold up a big mirror to everybody and be like, hey, we're here. Now's your chance. Now's your, opportunity to do it a little bit differently, or make some different changes, or not, and then stagnate and die. So yes, they are mirrors for all of the best and worst parts of being human. I include all of the bests because, for me, they're very much about, as much as they are death and darkness, love and longing and connection to loved ones, and being able to be there for that transition, to say goodbye, to help the spirit transition on to the other side, and to kind of be there for them and continue that relationship after. So very much, allies, psychopomps, offering support. They allow us to tap into the hidden parts of ourselves, to see where we need the most healing. And we'll see how towards the end, which is coming. They offer a window into our individual and collective shadow. So the individual reasons that we resonate with a specific plant, or the individual reasons that we're afraid of a specific plant, tell us a lot about ourselves and how we perceive and interact with the world. And we can do this on a larger level too, kind of looking at collective plant relationships and things that they bring up in regard to existing in a larger web of other entities. Offer us a window into some of the things that we need to work through as a group too. When we're cast into darkness for being different, it can be difficult to trust the light again. Healing doesn't have to be messy and painful, but sometimes it needs to be. And the poison path is part of that alternate road. And I think that's an important message, and for whoever needs to hear it. A lot of us are forced into the darkness. We are described in that way before we even have a chance to make a choice or identify ourselves as one or the other or neither. And that becomes a part of us, and it becomes a part of our narrative, and it's an important part to our healing. And so when people ask me, why poisonous plants, or why all of the dark stuff, it doesn't even have to be like a verbal ask. It's just, it's there. It's between the lines. I can feel it. I can sense it. And just see it in the reactions that people have. And that's the reason. Some of us need to heal in the darkness. Some of us need to go back into the earth, to go back into the ground, into the roots, into those places not touched by the sun, so that we can come back stronger. So that we can find our light again on our own terms and reemerge brighter. So that is the reason for all of the light and darkness. So it's important, if you find yourself on this path, that you ask yourself why you're here. Really ask yourself why. Everyone has a deeper reason for wanting to work with poisonous plants, unless you are just here because they are awesome. And I totally agree with that. So what attracts you, interests you, fascinates you about them or a particular one? What scares you about them? You can be fascinated and afraid of something at the same time. Maybe you're here because you're afraid of them and you want to get over that fear. Like, that's totally cool too. It doesn't have to be this love relationship. Are you attracted to a specific plant ally? And what do you already know about it? So you can connect with any of these plant spirits that you would like to. Everyone that wants to work with the spirit of Mandrake can work with the spirit of Mandrake. Anyone that wants to work with Datura can work with Datura. That's between you and Datura, and between you and the Mandrake. Nobody else is involved in that relationship. In the same way that I can tap into the spirit of the snake or the spirit of a Valkyrie. I've never met a Valkyrie in person, but I can tap into the energy, the spirit, the things that they embody, without having to have a piece of them present. Yes, it helps. Yes, it makes things easier. Yes, like, it's totally a thing. But we connect to energies that aren't physically there all the time. So don't get hung up on needing the physical body of the plant to be there, or dealing with, oh, well, this plant comes from this part of the world, or it's not native to the plant or the place that I live in. Maybe I shouldn't work with it. Maybe I should work with something here. If you want to explore Deadly Nightshade, if you want to explore Wolfsbane, go for it. Like, these are power plants. They are patrons of witchcraft and serpent gnosis and green magic. They are more than the physical bodies of the plants themselves. They are Medea, they are Circe, they are Hecate, they are Hel, they are the Valkyries, they're Odin. Give me goosebumps with all that. They are gateways to all of these spirits and energies and entities that we long to connect with on a deeper level. So just do it. What new insights and information can you gain about this plant? So this is where like the study and the information and the knowledge is all really important. Intuition is great. Intuition is amazing. Instinct is amazing. Doing things just because you know that that's how you've done them before, or that's how an ancestor did them, whether you have a physical memory or not, just following those voices, those calls is super, super duper important. But these plants also have hundreds, in some cases, thousands of years of history and stories and lore, which is essentially their memory. The plants remember this all in their bodies from their perspective, and we've remembered it, in the form of traditions and written works and academic papers and oral traditions and all of the different ways that plant information has come down to us from prehistory. Those are the stories, and to revisit those stories, to live through them again, especially from a place of like wanting to connect to the plant spirit, spiritual reverence, magical practice, like that is one of the best devotional things that you can do. And one of the best ways to connect with the essence of a plant spirit is to learn their story. There's a lot that can be transmitted non-verbally just by being in proximity to a plant spirit, but it is not a substitute for hundreds of years of human and plant relationship, as convoluted as it may be. So reading is a big part of all of this. And researching. And what you will often find through that process is that information and intuition really start to intersect and blend together. And you've got all of these different things kind of swimming around in your head and in your spirit about these plants, coming from all of these outside sources, but then also coming from your individual relationship with the plant, and then the relationship with the spirits that resonate with the plant that you're working with. So you've got all of these streams of potential for plant spirit communication. So how do you connect with that information? What things jump out at you when you're studying, reading up on a plant's medicinal action, its phytochemistry, its history, its folklore? How do you connect with it? What jumps out? Is there stuff that you're like, oh, that's really cool, or that's really interesting, or oh, that's really horrible that happened? Maybe there's stuff that you're like just disgusted by, or don't like it, or it just brings up really nasty things for you. So like, how do you connect with it? What does it do for you? So I kind of did this just sort of like stream of thought with my main plant spirit ally, Atropa belladonna, which has begun this whole process for me and informs a lot of what I do. So I called her Wisdom from Our Lady of Fate, because she is associated with the fates, the Parcae, the Moirai, the Greek fates, the Norns, the Spinners, the triad of female forces connected to creating the tapestry of existence, essentially. These are the most primal spirits. We could see them as, sort of manifestations of three aspects of the great goddess. The fates were the ones that made the rules. Even the gods had to do, what fate had already laid out. So fate is not working against us. It's just there. But it is something that we can tap into and something that we can open ourselves up to. that being said, they are very, 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 very primal powers. So we get into like powers of chthonic chaos and just very, very vast forces. So it's not something to open yourself up to lightly, unless you're ready to have your life and yourself flipped upside down. Because if we're not living in alignment with our fate and we ask the fates to take a bigger role in our lives, they will very quickly reorient everything so that it is in alignment with their design. Because nothing's messing up that tapestry. They've been working on it for way, way too long. So we've got a relief sculpture of the three fates to the right. Of course, Atropos or Atropa is the one very much connected with Belladonna because it's the one that ends life or cuts the thread. I would associate, Belladonna with all of the fates, all three of the Norns, past, present, future, however you want to look at those forces. And on the opposite side, we see, is it Heimdall? Some hero that is looking to get someone out of the underworld. The most important figure is Hel, the goddess Hela from Norse pantheon, as goddess of the underworld, the forgotten dead. She's known for being split down the middle, half of her being absolutely gorgeous. The other half is dead and rotted and looks like a corpse, basically. So you can see if you take a close look at the picture, the darker image on the bottom is the goddess Hel, and she's got a serpent wrapped around her arm, and her foot's up on a skull, and she's looking very sinister. I'm not sure why Iduna is sitting up on like a higher pedestal than her, because this is literally Hel's kingdom. But yeah, so she very much embodies this sort of interplay between darkness and light as well that's kind of been running through this whole thing. So just asking kind of myself in stream of consciousness about this plant ally. Why am I attracted to it? What brought me to it? What's interesting? What's profound? What stood out? Just kind of writing off some different things. So first and foremost, death and sex. A lifelong interest in death belies a deeper fear of dying. So I've had, fear of dying since I was a little kid. Nightmares, intrusive thoughts, anxiety. It's not always fear about me dying, as it is people that I love, and making sure they're not afraid, that they're not alone, that they don't get lost, I guess is like the biggest fear. So I could talk for a while about the history in that, but it's definitely a thing. It's a thing that's been with me. It doesn't seem to be going away. It likes to come up and down and remind me that it's still there. So this almost obsession or attraction to poisonous plants, to plants associated with death, just it is because of that. And I think from that fear, it has driven me to want to really help the dying and the dead. So healing for people that are already dead, transition for people that are already dead, but then also those that are going through those transitions, especially those, people that I love, that are the closest to me. It's kind of our job to make sure that they get to where they need to when that happens. Sex, which is on the opposite end of death, embodiment of sexual liberation to cope with trauma and guilt, gender roles, dominance, and submission. So the sexy kind of aphrodisiac side of Deadly Nightshade has always been super attractive. She is kind of the femme fatale of the nightshade family, or the poisonous plants. And while plant spirits aren't necessarily gendered, many of them being gender fluid, belladonna, deadly nightshade, almost always seems to manifest for everyone as a female spirit. Whether that female spirit is an ethereal, robed, dark fairy of the dead, or is she like a fierce 7 foot tall Valkyrie with like a bloody sword. So it can really go either way. Femininity does not necessarily equate to being gentle or submissive or anything like that. So it's kind of this projection of like this sexual prowess or empowerment. And I think to kind of just cope with certain traumas relating to guilt and just like identifying with your own sexuality and gender roles. And for me, just coming to terms with like homosexuality and being a gay man, but also being a man, and just all of the things that I think we all sort of process through as spirits living in human bodies. And then also dominance and submission. So that was a really interesting one to come up. I also often refer to belladonna as like the BDSM herb, because it's very much like that dominatrix kind of vibe that we get from working with that. And that really ties into like understanding roles of dominance and submission, and boundaries and power plays and different things like that, without getting into like too much of my personal life. So that's been super insightful. So just looking into like some of the attraction to the death and the sex part. And then I've also added like some of the medicinal action or qualities that the plant has that kind of correlate a little bit to the bullet that I'm talking about. So death and sex, I put the aphrodisiac. Obviously, it's poisonous, so that would go there too, but does have aphrodisiac properties. The nightshades in general, of course, have a history of use with that. So it is kind of this weird combo of those two. It is a quintessential witch's herb. So it is a visionary plant, more so a deliriant than a hallucinogen or psychedelic, but does cause visionary states at dangerous doses. But I often refer to it as the quintessential witch's herb. So it is one of the ones that pops up most frequently in the medieval flying ointment recipes. But just really just looking at like the spirit and the energy that she brings is very much this energy of the witch archetype. So she's poisonous, she's dark, she's beautiful, she's sexual, she's sensual, independent, just all of these things that I would attribute to what a witch is. It also is kind of a indicator of, maybe having some very specific ideas about what witchcraft is and what it isn't. We use this as kind of like a catch-all term to describe so many different things and such a wide, scope of practices that it can be easy to kind of box yourself in an effort to like find something genuine or find something you resonate with, or find something that's yours but that doesn't step on anybody else's toes, or so it's just kind of pointing to like, okay, maybe we need to look at our ideas about what witchcraft is, what is it not, what does that mean, does it matter, is it just a me thing, is it an everybody thing? So this is what I'm talking about, kind of conversation with the plant spirit, literally, and they will answer you. It does have visionary properties. I've included that there. And like I mentioned in the next one, it is deliriant and hypnotic. So these are not going to be like pretty colors and sparkly lights and things like that. While it does have those properties at higher doses, there are, perceptual changes at lower doses and vibrational doses and things like that. So please don't get hung up on that part. Next, power and influence. So it's very much an herb of glamour, seduction, manipulation. We see that with a lot of the nightshades and their earlier history in use as pocula amatoria, or love potions, which were essentially recreational herbal intoxicants that could be used among consenting lovers or non-consenting lovers in some cases. So these love potions to have kind of power and influence over others, or to advance your own power and influence. And that's something that we see, popping up time and time again between poisonous plants and love potions, and sort of this move for power or for social advancement. Obviously, this is the need to control and the need to surrender. So maybe why do you feel the need to control? What is it that you're trying to control? Are you trying to control your environment, or are you trying to control what's happening inside you by controlling the things outside of you? So how can you let go of that need to control? Is it coming from a place of anxiety and uncertainty, or wanting to create a safe space or a sense of security? Okay, well then where is that coming from? How can we let go of those fears and anxieties that lead to the need to have that sense of security? Basically just kind of thought processing through that. And then, of course, darkness. Can't be attracted to Atropa belladonna without being attracted to the darkness, because she literally draws you in with these big, black, shiny berries that are very tantalizing and seductive to look at. My mom calls them beads. They are midriatic, which means that they dilate the pupils. So literally, your pupils become like these giant black berries. That was used as a cosmetic for beautification, which is why it's called belladonna, but also later in ophthalmology, etc. But it does change the sight. It does open the eyes. Interestingly, for it being, such a dark and foreboding plant, like it literally dilates your pupils to let in the maximum amount of light. So you're taking in the most light possible because of this very dark and sinister plant. So kind of an interesting contradiction there. So what is this attraction to darkness? Is it an unhealthy attraction? We could connect this to sort of the fire and brimstone childhood that I would imagine many can relate to, that kind of creates this unhealthy dichotomy or split between dark and light. And I think that is something that people that have experienced that, whether it's through Christianity or another Abrahamic religion, or any other kind of power force that uses that good, bad, light, dark, us, them kind of dichotomy to split us and to split and to separate, could relate to that, and kind of needing to reintegrate, reorient, sort of processing through both of those. So, we can't get back to a balanced state by just exploring the darkness, but we have to bounce back and forth, zigzagging from dark to light, following this crooked path that's slithering through all of this work. And then I mentioned that it was a deadly poison. Anodyne and analgesic were the qualities that I attributed on this category, because being attracted to the deadliness, the poison, the power that comes with that, the ability to harm, all of these things Does it come from, this earlier place of wanting to hurt those who caused you pain, or taking all of those, dark and negative appellations that have been thrown at you over the years and throwing them back out at the world, because you can only hear that you're evil, you're a sinner, you're not good enough, you're bad, you're unhealthy, you're poisonous, you're toxic. You can only hear that so many times before all of that vitriol, nasty miasma building up inside of you just wants to explode out and just spew on everyone around you. So getting to, the roots of our pain, and being able to process and experience that in a safe place where we're able to get it out of our body, so that it stops making us sick and stops wanting to lash out and hurt other people, and trauma, which is essentially pain that has been trapped in the body, the physical body, the energetic body. And then just self-identifying with people's, virulent response to poison. So maybe, that's maybe why I get a little bit defensive when people, they just want to focus on the dark or the spooky, or be like, oh, well, why are you, doing this, this, and this when you could be doing that, or whatever. Taking it personally, and almost like it's triggering this earlier response of that, they're not having a virulent reaction to the fact that I'm working with poisonous plants, or it's not necessarily about the poisonous plants, but that it's actually at me, and that I'm, again, being told that I'm evil or dangerous, or, fill in the blank by fill in the blank. So it's all of these interesting just kind of things about who we are as people, kind of wrapped up in why we are attracted to the specific plants that we are. I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. I hope it made some sense, or struck a chord, or gave you some insight into, maybe approaching this work in a little bit different way, or giving you some different things to think about while you're on your journey. Definitely the intention is not to glorify poison or poisoning or hurting people or anything like that, or to, seem spooky or edgy or anything. These are very intelligent, very magical, very important plant allies, and there are infinite number expressions and manifestations that they come through as. So this is just my transmission. This is my gnosis of all of the different things that have passed through me, and how those connect and how those inform my work and the poison path and what that means for me, and in turn what I put in my books that I put out for everyone else. So stay tuned for the next book, The Poison Path Grimoire, which is going to really dive into a lot of these concepts that I've spoken about today. Check out The Poison Path Herbal, loaded with practical information on how to actually work with these plants, including all of the magical correspondence, history, folklore, spirits, deities, all of that sort of like meaty magical stuff, for you to essentially be able to build your own rituals and start incorporating these plants into like whatever other magical practice you're already doing. It doesn't have to look a certain way or to be a certain way to be the poison path, or to work with, a nightshade or a mushroom or whatever. These can be blended into and grafted onto literally any type of plant spirit practice, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Support me on Patreon if you're interested in learning more. That's patreon.com/poisonersapothecary. I have been writing articles publicly since 2016. Those can be found scattered across the internet, mainly on patheos.com/blog/poisonersapothecary and the poisonersapothecary.com/blogs. Follow me, pretty much just Poisoner's Apothecary, Poison Path, or my name in any search engine or platform, and I'll pop up. I'm happy to answer any questions, provide resources, or support in any way. Feel free to reach out. And that concludes my presentation. Yay. All right. I don't think there's anything else I have to add. This was recorded, part of Botanica Obscura 2023. And I think we're good to go. So I'm just going to sign off now. Thanks for watching, everyone.